There is a city in Southeast Asia that looks like a vision of the future. If you land at its international airport, you travel into the city center on an automated high-speed train that glides silently above pristine palm canopy. You pass through mega-developments carved from the jungle, surrounded by multi-lane highways that rival anything in North America or Western Europe. At night, the skyline is dominated by towering spires of glass and steel that pierce through the humid tropical haze. Everything about this place screams success. It looks rich. It feels modern. It moves with the quiet confidence of a nation that has solved the complex puzzle of modern development. And yet, something is deeply wrong. Beneath the shimmering glass facades, inside the air-conditioned office towers, and along the tree-lined suburban streets, a silent crisis is unfolding. A crisis that isn't showing up in the glossy tourism brochures. A crisis that politicians rarely acknowledge and international investors routinely miss. It isn't a war. It isn't a sudden economic crash. It isn't a natural disaster. It is something far more dangerous. It is an invisible drain. A slow, systematic leakage that is quietly pulling the actual future out of this country, day after day, year after year. And by the end of this video, you will understand why Malaysia's biggest problem isn't what it is missing, but what it keeps giving away. But wait! Before we begin, please subscribe to ensure that you never miss out on any of my essential stuff. Comment "I subscribe" below, and I will personally welcome you to our community. With that said, let's get started. Imagine you're sitting in a coffee shop in Subang Jaya, a quiet, prosperous suburb just outside Kuala Lumpur. It's 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. Rain is pounding against the floor-to-ceiling glass windows, a typical afternoon tropical downpour. Inside, the cafe is filled with young people in their early 20s. They look like the picture-perfect demographic of a thriving, modern economy. They are fluent in 3 languages. They are wearing sharp, contemporary clothes. Their laptops are open to lines of code, financial models, medical research papers, and graphic design boards. These are not kids hanging out. These are the sharpest, most capable, highly educated young minds a developing country could ever hope to produce. The human fuel of the 21st century. Now, look a little closer at their screens. They aren't looking at local job portals in Kuala Lumpur or Penang. They aren't applying for management tracks at domestic firms. They are looking at visa requirements for Australia. They are calculating tax brackets in the United Kingdom. They are converting salaries from Singapore dollars into Malaysian ringgit. They are chatting with university alumni who left 2 years ago and never came back. If you talk to them, they won't sound angry. They won't sound like revolutionaries. They sound resigned. They love the food. They love their families. They love the warm weather, the rich culture, and the quiet comfort of their hometowns. And yet, almost every single one of them has already made a mental decision. Within 24 months, they will pack 2 suitcases, walk through the gates at Kuala Lumpur International Airport, and board a flight out of the country. And most of them will never return. Scale that coffee shop up. Multiply those 10 young professionals by thousands. Multiply them by tens of thousands. Multiply them across 3 generations of engineers, doctors, data scientists, researchers, and entrepreneurs. When you walk down the streets of Kuala Lumpur, you don't see this happening. You see the shiny hardware of a modern country. You see new MRT lines. You see gleaming shopping malls filled with luxury global brands. You see highways stretching into the horizon. It looks like progress. So why does it feel like the nation is running on a treadmill? Why does a country that spends tens of billions of dollars building world-class physical infrastructure feel like a temporary transit lounge for its own most valuable people? How can a nation look so remarkably wealthy on the outside, while quietly losing the human engine required to sustain that wealth on the inside? You start asking yourself these questions, and suddenly the shiny towers look a little different. You realize that a country can build all the glass spires it wants, but if the mines meant to fill those spires are leaving, those buildings are just expensive tombstones for a future that never arrived. Here is the central truth that nobody wants to state out loud. Malaysia does not have an infrastructure problem. Malaysia does not have a natural resource problem. Malaysia has a human capital hemorrhage. Malaysia has systematically turned itself into one of the world's most generous, highly subsidized incubators for other countries' talent. It educates, nurtures, and funds the growth of brilliant young minds, only to maintain a system that forces them to pack their bags and hand their most productive working years directly to foreign economies. It is a country running a high-performance engine, while actively drilling holes in its own fuel tank. To grasp the true scale of this problem, you have to look at a single stretch of road. It is a 4-lane, 1-kilometer-long bridge made of concrete and asphalt called the Johor-Singapore Causeway. On a map, it looks like a minor detail, a tiny black line connecting the southern tip of mainland Asia to a small island state. In reality, it is one of the most intense, high-volume economic choke points on the planet. Every morning, long before the sun rises, at 3 or 4 in the morning, the air on the Malaysian side of the causeway thickens with the sound of hundreds of thousands of motorbikes idling in the humid dark. Headlights stretch into the distance like an endless river of white light. Over 300,000 Malaysians cross that short stretch of water every single day. They are not tourists. They are not visiting family. They are engineers, nurses, software developers, construction supervisors, accountants, and technicians. They wake up at 3 a.m. in Johor, spend 2 to 3 hours standing in exhausting immigration queues, work a 12-hour shift in Singapore, and then spend another 2 to 3 hours fighting their way back across the border at night. They do this 5, sometimes 6 days a week. Why? Why would hundreds of thousands of educated, capable people subject themselves to a daily commute that feels like an exercise in physical endurance? Because the moment their feet touch the soil on the other side of that 1-kilometer bridge, their labor is instantly valued at 3 to 4 times what it is worth at home. Think about that contrast. 1 single kilometer. On the north side of the water, a Malaysian software engineer earns a salary that has barely adjusted for inflation in a decade, struggling against rising living costs in a currency that has steadily lost ground for 30 years. On the south side of that exact same water, that exact same skill set commands a wage that can alter the financial trajectory of an entire family within 5 years. Singapore, a tiny island with no oil, no timber, no mineral wealth, and no fresh water of its own, built one of the highest standards of living in human history. And it built a massive portion of that prosperity using the raw intellectual power of Malaysian citizens. Malaysia bore the financial cost of raising those workers. Malaysia built the neighborhood schools. Malaysia funded the public health systems that kept them healthy as children. Malaysia subsidized the universities that trained them. And then, at the exact moment those young people were ready to generate high-value economic output, Malaysia handed them across the water. Singapore didn't have to spend a single dollar on their childhoods. It simply collected the dividend. That wasn't even the strange part. The strange part is that this isn't a secret. It isn't a sudden crisis that caught policymakers by surprise. Official estimates suggest that over 1.8 million Malaysians currently live and work abroad. Out of a total population of roughly 33 million, that number might not sound catastrophic at first glance. Until you look at who those 1.8 million people actually are. This is not an unskilled workforce emigrating to perform manual labor in distant fields. Over 3/4 of the Malaysians who leave hold tertiary education qualifications or specialized technical certifications. It is an acute, concentrated exodus of the absolute top tier of the country's intellectual capability. Think about what that means in practice. If you took every world-class surgeon, every senior semiconductor engineer, every senior software architect, and every tech founder who left Malaysia over the last 25 years and placed them back inside the country tomorrow, Malaysia's economy would transform almost overnight. It would instantly shatter the economic ceiling it has been hitting for 2 decades. So why haven't they come back? Why does the bleed continue year after year, through different administrations, different economic master plans, and decades of high-minded political rhetoric? To answer that, you have to look at a concept economists call the middle-income trap. Imagine a ladder. At the bottom rungs are low-income nations. They grow their economies through low-cost, labor-intensive work, basic agriculture, simple garment manufacturing, and low-end assembly lines. At the top rungs are high-income nations. They grow through high-value innovation, designing microchips, writing software platforms, managing global financial systems, and creating intellectual property. In the 1970s and 1980s, Malaysia climbed off the bottom rungs faster than almost anyone else in the developing world. It transformed itself from a quiet exporter of rubber and tin into an industrial power. It constructed deep water ports. It enticed global electronics companies to build massive assembly plants in Penang and Selangor. It put millions of its citizens into factory jobs. By the 1990s, Malaysia was accelerating up the middle of that ladder. Economists grouped it alongside South Korea, Taiwan, and Singapore as one of the rising economic powerhouses of Asia. The trajectory looked unstoppable. And then, Malaysia hit a wall. Not because it regressed, but because climbing from the middle of the ladder to the top of the ladder requires an entirely different engine than climbing from the bottom to the middle. To move from low income to middle income, you need physical infrastructure. You need paved highways, reliable electricity, deep water ports, and low-cost factory labor. Malaysia built those exceptionally well. To move from middle income to high income, physical infrastructure isn't enough. You need human infrastructure. You need domestic innovation. You need patents created at home. You need companies that don't just assemble products designed in California, Munich, or Tokyo, but design those products themselves. And to do that, you must cultivate and retain an intense concentration of top-tier talent. This is where Malaysia's machine broke down. Because at the exact moment the nation needed to shift its priorities toward holding on to its brightest minds, its institutional systems did the opposite. It built a ceiling over them. Look at how that ceiling actually works in practice. In a pure meritocracy, if a private company wants to hire an executive, it hires the best candidate. If a public university wants to admit a student, it admits the student with the highest marks. If a government awards a research grant, it goes to the team with the most promising idea. Meritocracy creates a simple psychological agreement. If you work harder, if you innovate better, if you master your field, you will advance. Malaysia, however, operates under a unique system that was established in the early 1970s, the New Economic Policy. When it was introduced, it had a clear and noble objective: to rebalance national wealth and lift the indigenous Malay majority out of historical, colonial-era poverty. It created sweeping affirmative action preferences for the majority population across public university admissions, government procurement contracts, affordable housing allocations, and civil service positions. For a time, it accomplished its goal. It created a stable, educated Malay middle class that hadn't existed before. It brought social peace to a country that had been shaken by ethnic tensions. But as the decades turned into half a century, that temporary structural intervention hardened into a permanent legal reality. And it created a psychological environment that no traditional economic model accounts for. If you are a young Malaysian from a non-majority background, say, Chinese Malaysian or Indian Malaysian, you can achieve perfect academic scores, work 80 hours a week, and build deep technical expertise. And yet, at critical junctures in your life, you will run directly into explicit, legal barriers based on identity rather than capability. You are subtly, or not so subtly, reminded that your home country measures your potential through the lens of ancestry first and performance second. Consider the psychological weight of that realization on a bright 19-year-old student. What do? They look across the ocean. They see universities in Singapore, Australia, or the United Kingdom offering places based strictly on academic performance. They see global tech firms in Silicon Valley or London that care about a single metric: can you solve the problem? So they leave. Then I notice something even more startling. It isn't just minorities who are leaving anymore. This is the part of the story that completely upends the traditional political narrative inside Malaysia. For decades, defenders of the system argued that the brain drain was simply the unavoidable price of maintaining social harmony, a tax paid to preserve domestic peace. But look at the data coming out of Malaysia today. Young Malay professionals, the exact group the system was designed to protect and empower, are now emigrating in record numbers as well. Why? Because when an economic system prioritizes political connections, identity quotas, and institutional patronage over raw merit, it creates a ceiling that eventually presses down on everyone. A young Malay software engineer or medical scientist looks at the ecosystem around them and sees the same stagnation. They see entry-level professional salaries that have remained virtually flat in real terms for 20 years. They see senior leadership positions in public institutions awarded based on political alignment rather than track records of innovation. They realize that even with systemic advantages, the overall container they are operating in is too small for their ambitions. So they pack their bags, too. The system isn't just leaking minority talent anymore. It is leaking capability, period. What happened next changes everything. Because while Malaysia's educated middle class was heading for the exits, the domestic economy still needed people to function. An economy cannot grow in a vacuum. If your homegrown, highly educated talent is emigrating to drive high-tech growth in Singapore, London, and Melbourne, how do you keep your domestic factories running? How do you construct your skyscrapers? How do you harvest the vast palm oil plantations that generate billions in export revenue? You import labor from somewhere else. And that is precisely what Malaysia did. It set up a secondary, inverted migration loop. At the top end, Malaysia exports its high-skilled, tertiary-educated citizens to wealthy foreign economies. At the bottom end, Malaysia imports millions of low-skilled, low-cost migrant workers from Bangladesh, Indonesia, Nepal, and Myanmar to perform manual labor at home. Look at the underlying economics of that trade. You export senior software developers, medical specialists, and chip designers. You import low-cost manual labor for construction sites and plantations. You are systematically trading high-value human capital for low-margin physical labor. And that trade locks the entire economy into a self-reinforcing trap. Here's why. When a domestic economy has access to a virtually endless supply of underpaid foreign manual labor, local companies have zero incentive to modernize. Why would a construction firm in Kuala Lumpur spend millions of dollars buying advanced prefabricated building technology when it can simply hire 200 migrant laborists at minimal wages? Why would an agricultural enterprise invest in robotic harvesting machinery when it can rely on cheap manual labor? Cheap labor destroys the incentive to innovate. A lack of innovation keeps domestic productivity low. Low productivity keeps domestic wages stagnant. Stagnant wages force homegrown talent to leave the country. And the departure of homegrown talent forces the country to rely even more heavily on cheap imported labor. It is a closed, self-perpetuating loop. A country running its economic evolution in reverse. The numbers get even crazier when you look at what this dynamic does to the currency in your pocket. The Malaysian ringgit was once one of the most respected currencies in Southeast Asia. In the late 1990s, one Singapore dollar was roughly equivalent to 1.2 Malaysian ringgit. They were essentially peer currencies. You could hold either one and feel confident in its global purchasing power. Today, one Singapore dollar buys over 3.5 Malaysian ringgit. Think about what that mathematical reality does to the everyday life of an ordinary citizen. That isn't an abstract line on a Bloomberg terminal. That is the systematic decay of local purchasing power. It means imported technology, laptops, laboratory equipment, specialized industrial machinery, gets progressively more expensive relative to local incomes every single year. It means sending a child to study at a top international university, once a realistic goal for a middle-class family, becomes an impossible luxury without extreme personal wealth or rare government sponsorship. When a currency steadily depreciates over decades, it sends a loud psychological message to everyone earning in that currency. Your time and effort are losing ground on the world stage. If you stay, you are running faster every year just to keep your head above water. If you step across the border, your personal wealth multiplies instantly simply because your paycheck is calculated in a different currency. How do you convince an ambitious 25-year-old financial analyst to stay under those conditions? How do you convince them that staying in Kuala Lumpur is a rational financial decision when a 1-hour flight to Singapore instantly multiplies their global purchasing power? You can't appeal to logic. You can appeal to patriotism. You can talk about the incredible food, the warm weather, the close proximity to family, and the relaxed lifestyle. And for a while, those things work. Until economic gravity eventually takes over. And that's where the real question begins. Because all of this leads to an obvious mystery. If this problem is so clear, if the statistics are so undeniable, if every corporate leader and economist in Kuala Lumpur admits it behind closed doors, why hasn't it been fixed? Why hasn't a government, any government, stood up, restructured the incentives, removed the artificial barriers, reformed the education system, and created an environment where domestic talent wants to stay? The answer lies in the nature of political power. Because fixing this problem requires accepting short-term political pain in exchange for long-term national survival. And short-term political pain is the one thing a fragile political system cannot tolerate. To fix this structural flaw, a government would have to stand in front of the electorate and deliver a difficult message. The protective policies that were built to help you 50 years ago are the exact policies holding the nation back today. We must transition to a system based strictly on need and merit. We must allow our institutions to compete at global standards, even if it disrupts comfortable arrangements. In a political environment defined by narrow parliamentary majorities and intense competition for rural voting blocks, delivering that message is viewed as political suicide. It is vastly easier for politicians to offer short-term comfort. More subsidies, more handouts, more protected government contracts, more public sector positions created to absorb university graduates who can't find high-paying jobs in the private sector. Subsidies function like a local anesthetic. They dull the immediate pain of a stagnant system without curing the underlying disease. They keep fuel cheap at the gas station. They keep basic food prices artificial. They give people just enough breathing room to manage the month. But they do nothing to build native technology giants. They do nothing to create world-class research laboratories. They do nothing to stop a brilliant young engineer from booking a one-way ticket out of the country. Subsidies hide the symptoms while the structural engine quietly wears down. Look at the institutional cost of that trade-off over time. When top-tier talent leaves a country, the quality of its public institutions inevitably drops. Public universities that were once ranked among the best in Asia drift down global tables. State research institutes become slow-moving bureaucracies. Public health systems watch their most experienced specialists depart for private hospitals or overseas health networks. As institutional quality declines, the quality of education for the next generation drops along with it. The students graduating today are, through no fault of their own, being trained by an academic ecosystem that has already lost many of its best minds. This creates a compounding generational loss. It isn't just that the country is losing talent today. It is losing the capacity to produce top-tier talent tomorrow. This reveals a striking, uncomfortable contrast when you look at Malaysia's neighbors. Look at Vietnam. 30 years ago, Vietnam was recovering from decades of devastating conflict. Its economy was tiny, its infrastructure primitive. Malaysia viewed Vietnam from a position of overwhelming economic dominance. Today, global technology giants are moving advanced manufacturing and R&D facilities into Vietnam at a dizzying pace. Why? Because Vietnam has cultivated a young, hyper-competitive workforce that is throwing itself into science, technology, engineering, and mathematics with absolute intensity. Their upward mobility is driven by raw, unfiltered performance in a rapidly opening market. Or look at Indonesia. A nation of 270 million people that spent decades battling administrative paralysis and logistical chaos. Today, its digital economy is expanding rapidly, producing domestic tech unicorns, attracting billions in venture capital, and creating an ecosystem where young, ambitious Indonesians can build major enterprises at home. Malaysia finds itself squeezed in the middle of these regional dynamics. Above it sits Singapore, monopolizing high finance, regional corporate headquarters, and advanced technology. Below it sit Vietnam and Indonesia, capturing high-growth manufacturing, massive domestic market scale, and low-cost production momentum. Malaysia is caught in the center. Too expensive to compete on low-wage labor. Lacking the unhindered talent density required to dominate high-end innovation. Trapped in the middle of the ladder. And yet, this is not a story of inevitable failure. It is a story of incredible, frustratingly unfulfilled potential. Because here is the central paradox that makes watching Malaysia so deeply fascinating. The country already possesses almost every single ingredient required to succeed. It really does. It sits directly along the Strait of Malacca, the most critical maritime trade corridor on Earth. It holds rich natural wealth, offshore natural gas, high-value agricultural land, and valuable mineral reserves. It is geographically blessed, sheltered from the devastating earthquakes and typhoons that regularly hit its neighbors. It has constructed physical infrastructure that puts many developed nations to shame. Drive down the North-South Expressway or step onto the automated transit networks in Kuala Lumpur, and you are looking at a country that can build world-class physical systems. It has a multi-ethnic, multilingual population that can effortlessly bridge Western, Chinese, Indian, and Middle Eastern business environments without needing a translator. The hardware is already installed. It is the software, the social contract, the policy settings, the institutional willingness to reward merit over identity that needs an update. Imagine what happens if that software gets updated. Imagine a country that looks at every child born within its borders and says, "It doesn't matter what your ancestral background is. It doesn't matter what language your grandparents spoke at home. If you are brilliant, we will invest in you. If you build an extraordinary enterprise, we will clear the path for you. If you work hard, your home country will offer you an unlimited ceiling." If that single psychological shift occurred, the talent drain wouldn't just stop. It would reverse. The millions of skilled Malaysians living in Singapore, London, Sydney, and San Francisco, people who still miss the food, who still love the culture, who still carry a deep affection for their homeland, would look back and realize they no longer have to choose between their patriotism and their potential. They would bring their global networks home. They would bring their capital home. They would bring decades of high-level experience home. The country wouldn't just step out of the middle-income trap. It would leap past it. Which brings us back to that quiet cafe in Subang Jaya. To the young engineer looking at her laptop screen, weighing her options for the future. Her decision isn't just an individual career choice. It is a tiny, quiet referendum on the state of the nation. Every time a brilliant researcher, a skilled doctor, or a promising founder boards a flight out of Kuala Lumpur, they are casting a vote on whether their home country can offer a stage big enough for their dreams. And every time one of them leaves, the room gets a little quieter. The future gets a little smaller. The reliance on physical assets of the past grows just a little bit heavier. Malaysia's greatest challenge isn't a lack of resources, money, or modern infrastructure. It is a choice. A choice to prioritize comfortable, legacy arrangements over the demands of a fiercely competitive world. The highways are built. The towers are lit up against the night sky. The ports are open for business. The physical machinery is ready and waiting. The only question left is whether the nation will realize that its most valuable natural asset was never the oil under its seabed, or the timber in its forests, or the strategic waters along its coastlines. Its most valuable asset was always the mind sitting quietly in its classrooms. And until it builds a system that holds onto them. The lights of the Petronas Towers will continue to shine out across the tropical night, illuminating a magnificent, modern nation that built a world-class home for everyone, except the visionaries needed to lead it into the future. If this documentary changed the way you see Malaysia, or made you think differently about how nations actually succeed or stall, make sure to subscribe. Drop a comment below with your thoughts. Do you think Malaysia can reform its systems in time to stop the brain drain? Or has the momentum toward its neighbors become too strong to reverse? I read through the responses and I'm curious to hear your perspective. Like the video to help it reach more people, and I'll see you in the next story.